everyone, welcome back to the Music Chat, and we're here today on a kind of a gloomy day outside, so we're kind of happy to be inside doing a nice chat with you all. And so today we're going to be talking about the hymn Blest Be the Tie that Binds. And we picked this, and we've found out some things about it that we hope you'll enjoy hearing about. And Barbara's going to start by talking about John Fawcett, who was a theologian, lived in the 1700s and early 1800s, and he was the writer of this original poem, and had a real inspirational moment when he used it, and she's going to tell us about that.
Right, yeah, I know. He was English, and you're right that he was in the late 1700s and early 1800s. He died in 1817 and was born in 1739. So I guess really that's not too late. It was about middle of 1700s.
Lived a good, solid, long life. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Long life, yeah.
And he was orphaned when he was 12, and back then, at this time, they would just they called it bound out, and it would be somebody in the community that would take him in and allow him to live with them. And he was bound out by a tailor, so he spent some time probably learning how to do that. But he also had this curious mind, and so he taught himself a lot.
I think he taught himself to read in the evenings, like after he was done with his work in the tailor shop. Yeah.
So it starts with that little kernel of curiosity, and I think he knew that this being a tailor was not what he wanted to do. And he was probably very smart, and so he taught himself. He was self-educated, and was inspired, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. He was inspired when he attended a meeting that was given by George Whitefield. Now, we have talked about the Wesleys,
right? And
George Whitefield was part of the Holy Club,
right, at the University of Oxford. Yeah,
and he was going out and having these huge meetings, and John was very inspired by one of his sermons that he gave, or talks that he gave to this large crowd, and he said he walked up. It's been noted that he walked up to Whitefield afterward and said, "I want to be a preacher just like you," and he said he gave him his blessing. So I think that's why he started out as a Methodist, because of Whitefield and because of the Holy Club. And then he eventually went to the Baptist Church, and we're not really sure why, except that maybe, like you said, they offered him a position.
Right.
It's hard to know. But I know you're going to talk more about the Holy Club people when we talk about the melody. But I'm going to finish up a little bit about the text, because he was a poet, and John was married, and he took a position in very rural England. And this was a farm community, and he didn't get paid very much, but he and his wife and his 4 children for a while stayed with people within the community. They eventually had a place to live, and he would go door to door. Again, that was what the Methodists did when they went to the United States. If you remember, they went door to door to try to talk to people. So he didn't really have a congregation, but they sent him out in this very rural place. He went door to door, and he gained people who believed in him, and he gained the people that started to come to his services. He eventually had a space for them, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then, because of his notoriety, he was offered a better position, a better church in London. And he's looking at his wife. We have 4 kids. We can barely scrape by because they just don't have any money. And so he decided to take this position. And this is where this song comes in, because they loaded up everything for their trip to London. They decided they were going to do it. And everybody in the congregation was just so sad to see him go.
And they were sad.
And they were very sad. In fact, I'll read you this little thing, because they had loaded up everything. They were getting ready to get out of town, and this is what this says: the crowd was despondent and in tears. According to this person that was telling this story, Mr. Bailey, Mary is quoted as saying, "I can't stand it, John. I know not how to go." And John said, "Lord, help me, Mary, nor can I stand it. We will unload the wagon." And to the crowd he said, "We've changed our minds. We are going to stay." And it's described as a scene of pandemonium and cheering, and they were so happy that he decided to stay. And so they did, and they stayed for 54 years.
He was there for 54 years.
Yeah.
He died there. He's buried there in the cemetery at the Waynesgate Church where he was, the Waynesgate Baptist Church. And the building, I believe, I was reading a little bit about the building itself. It's on the historic, what we would call the historic register in England, and so it's preserved. And
Wonderful.
you know, from that period, this is hundreds of years old now.
That's
you
wonderful.
know, and
Yeah.
so he's buried there, and you know,
He must have been a very inspiring
I'm
preacher.
sure he was the longest running preacher at that church.
I bet.
Yeah, so.
And he eventually added a school to the building, so he was interested in education. He did gain notoriety through some of his writings because he was a poet and he had some of the things. Oh, and what I need to say is, after this whole thing, you know, it was often the case that the pastors would write a hymn or write something for every church service at the end. And because of this wonderful outpouring of love, that was what inspired him to write Blest Be the Tie is the Vine. And it became very much loved by so many people that heard it after that. Just because I'm sure it was because of the passion in which he wrote it, but that's where it came from. After,
well, and it does talk about, you know, the verses of the poem, the hymn, talk about the dependence we have, or the importance of the community of Christ. You know, that you know, we can be islands, you know, if we want to, but we are so enriched by our gathering together.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so you know, it really had to be with that tie that binds us together. You know, our fellowship of Christian love.
That's right.
You know, that brings us into fellowship with one another, and so it really speaks to that value, and is you know, so beloved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he was feeling at the time, because of this outpouring of love from his congregation.
Yeah,
They did
and
not
we were
want him to
talking
go.
earlier that I read where, along with God Be With Us Till We Meet Again, it is the most used and most valuable song or hymn to accompany occasions of parting. So someone's leaving, or a pastor might be leaving, just like this was going to be, or we're parting this life and on to the next.
Right.
You know, the fourth verse in particular talks about parting the earth and our hope for, you know, our reunion in the afterlife. You know, words that are hopeful and inspiring to us.
And so meaningful to us now, because we can't really be with our people, with our congregation.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, we still have each other, but it's we don't have the luxury of seeing each other every week and feeling that.
We have to really work at it now.
Yes.
You know, I know when I watch the church service, and you know, this morning I see Pastor Lydia, and it just reminds me of her, and reminds me of her family, and how enriched we are by, you know, that family. And then, you know, Susie reads or says a prayer and reads a scripture, and you know, it makes me think of Susie. And so it is our we have to really try to
hold on to those things.
Yeah, to hang on to the ties of
Yeah.
mind. You
Yeah.
know, that our experiences from when we were gathered together are what we cling to now in our time of separation.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think it's very timely
Yeah, I
for
think
us
so
right
too.
now. So do you want to tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about the
so
melody?
you know, he wrote this, and you know, so how did it become the hymn that we know today that is so famous? The you know the we all know that it's so famous, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
so where did that melody come from? Well, the melody came from a theologian and hymn writer named Georg Nägeli. And he was a Swiss composer and teacher who lived also in the late 1800s, or late 1700s, early 1800s. He was a career musician who composed and taught music, and he was also a publisher. He was pretty well known as a publisher.
Oops. Sorry. Life.
Speaking of technology binding us together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry about
But anyway, he you know, he was also a pretty famous theologian. He was a writer of music. He wrote about music as a subject, you know, an academic subject, that kind of thing.
Pedagogy.
Right, and so he was the actual, we think he was the actual hymn writer of this. He came up with that melody, not for Blest Be the Tie, that was probably used, I think, for, it looked like a German title that maybe it had music with it at one time. You know, that Lowell Mason, who
Our
lived,
friend.
yeah, so we're back to him again. Of course, these guys were living, overlapping each other, and so possibly even knew each other. Probably not, but it's not without, you know, a possibility that they could have even overlapped somewhere along the line.
And remember, Lowell Mason did go to Europe for a while.
He did.
He picked up a lot of the European.
Well, he was very
composition.
interested in, you know, we did that Opus 10 about Lowell Mason, where we talked about how influential he was in music education, as well as all the hymns that he wrote. It turns out that Nägeli was also interested in the teachings of Pestalozzi. I think they possibly did know each other.
That's really cool.
And I think Pestalozzi and Nägeli could have possibly overlapped somehow, or Mason, because of this mutual interest in Pestalozzi and the teachings.
I would say
of
so.
them. They both wrote about Pestalozzi and used his teachings in their own teaching methods, and then they were both passers on of that philosophy of teaching, which we still use today in our classes. We study Pestalozzi in music ed classes, and so all of that was passed down through these two men. So an interesting tie there, you know, with this guy that, you know, certainly never knew John Fawcett, I don't think, you know. It's interesting how this melody came to be with this hymn, and how these people sort of intertwined in their goals and aspirations and their involvements in music. And so I was telling Barbara for the chat that this has nothing to do with the hymn, but one of the things that Nagaly is famous for is using the term dynamics in music. And he wrote quite a bit about this. It has helped us. And dynamics, you know, for the non-musicians are the louds and softs and the crescendos. It's the expression that we bring to music to give it life. And it became a word that we now associate with how we define music as a source of energy. It's something that moves forward.
Fluid.
And the way that we get it to move forward is through the way we use expression, louds and softs and crescendos and staccatos and things that make music sort of come to life. And he was actually awarded by the University of Bonn like some kind of honorary award for his importance, and his contribution to music theory and coining the phrase of dynamics as they associate.
I didn't know that.
So
that's
very cool. So the music theorists out there would be all over that. But then, the short story is Lowell Mason he found that tune and thought it would be a good match for, Blest Be the Tie That Binds, and he arranged it and harmonized it probably, and so now we have that melody that matches up.
And it's in lots and lots and lots of hymnals for sure.
Right, and I found out too, I'm a little guilty of not always playing it fast enough.
Oh.
It's from what I can gather, it was intended to be sung in 2 phrases in one. So you don't want to do. When we hear it sung like that, I've probably been guilty. It's supposed to be right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's supposed to go.
I believe that because it's as an exiting kind of a thing. It's joyful.
Right.
Well, next time we do it, we're just gonna have
I'm
to
gonna
hop
make
down
sure
the
that
aisles.
I don't play it too slow next time. We'll try to do that when we sing it later.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting. I also like
interesting.
the simple construction of the hymn that Nägeli used. He, being a theorist, he was probably thinking theory when he wrote this, but he used it for the musicians out there. He used an interval of a third, which is just a skip. You have 3 notes in a row, and you go from this note, and you skip over this one, and you get to the next one. That's a third.
Right.
So you just go key, 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 and you leave out the middle key, and you've got a third. You can either go a third up or a third down. And so 9 out of the 16 measures have either an ascending third or a descending third. So so it's sequences.
And it makes it feel very tonal.
Yeah, and so here's what the whole melody sounds like. Here's the second half, and the first half goes down. Now this half will still use the thirds, but it's going to rise. Here's the highest note. The highest note in a piece is usually what we call a climax of a piece, and it's usually 2/3 through the piece, which that perfectly is. Yeah. So.
And I didn't think about those thirds, but man, it just makes it feel like I said, very tonal and secure and
predictable, but not in a bad way.
No.
Yeah, not in a bad way. So
good job.
Yeah,
Mr. Nägeli.
Yes, and Mr. Mason,
and Mr. Mason,
and Mr. Fawcett for giving us the inspiring words. So
did you want to say anything?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want, as far as Mr. Fawcett goes, Reverend Fawcett, I do want to say that apparently he had gained enough notoriety toward the end of his life because of his writings that Brown University bestowed upon him an honorary Doctor of Divinity. So that's pretty cool.
That's pretty significant
in those times because we're talking about across the pond,
Right.
And for that to happen is pretty significant. I didn't find his life to be extraordinary in a way as far as lots of stories and details, but
and the reason being he stayed in that small community, that cold climate up there, and lived in the country. Yeah, exactly.
How far, really how far-reaching. And I think that he came across to me as someone who was so sincere in his preaching and in his work. It usually, cream rises to the top and stays there. So, I was quite impressed with Mr. Fawcett after that.
Right. So I think we'll sing all 4 verses. It's a short hymn, so we'll sing all 4 verses, and I'll go ahead and tell you, I'm going to play you out in the credits today with an arrangement. There's an arranger, a piano arranger called, let me make sure I get it right. It's Anna Laura Page. She's a current writer of hymns, and I use her arrangements a lot in my preludes and postludes and things.
Lots of anthems.
And she wrote an arrangement of this that just happens to be in the classical style, so it sounds sort of like Mozart wrote it or something. And I thought that would be a great way to go out to honor the hymn, but also to tip my hat to the melody writer, who was Nägeli, and he published works by Clementi, who was, if anyone's taken piano lessons, you've probably played a Clementi sonata in your life. Works by Clementi resemble late Beethoven and Mozart and some of those guys, and so I thought it would be kind of fun to play this arrangement of Miss Pound. I'm just going to play a short excerpt of it, of course, but I picked it because it is in the classical style, and I thought that would be a good way to sort of just tip my hat to these guys.
Always appreciate the classical style.
Yeah. So until next time, we'll see you on the Music Chat.
Bye. Blest be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the unity of heart and mind is like to that above. Before our Father's throne we pour our ardent prayers, our fears, our hopes, our aims, our love, our comforts and our cares. We share our mutual woes, our mutual burdens bear, and often for each other flows a sympathizing tear. From sorrow, toil, and pain, and sin we shall be